Hello, America. I'm Hav, and welcome to the next episode 3 of Looking Over Strange Terrain. I hope all is well, and you're finding yourself safe in light of all that's going on in the world today. We are indeed facing some challenging times, and I hope that if you are out protesting, that you're doing so peacefully, safely, and encouraging others to do the same. Today I'm here to talk about pace count and why you would use pace count, and how to break down pace count into smaller increments, and most importantly, how to keep track of pace count. So let's talk about how the knots are constructed, or how pace count beads are constructed. So they're made of paracord and are commonly made with beads. I have decided to use what they call a cow hitch, which has been cut off and burnt at the ends. And the difference between I don't use knots, because knots are used to join two pieces of cordage together. For instance, like I have two ends here. I have two running ends, two separate pieces of cordage. And so if I want to join them together with a square knot, right over left, left over right, and pull. And you got a nice little square knot. All right. Now, a hitch is used to fix a rope to another object. So I have my cordage here, the bite, and all I'm going to do is go over and around and through. And this is the method that which you would use to attach these pace count hitches. I'm just going to call them a pace count cord, all right? And that'll affix to your kit in this manner. Normally you would thread it through the webbing. All right, so each of these pace count cords, this cordage, is going to consist of two parts. Although it's one piece, they're made up of individual pieces. Okay, the first piece, the piece here, is roughly about 15 to 16 inches. All right. Each of these black marks here is shrink. The stuff that you would put over wire, shrink wrap. And I did that so instead of, in lieu of tying a knot here, because I just don't like the way cosmetically how the knot looks. But you can usually just do an overhand knot in 2-3 places. One here, and this one separates. This is about 4 inches from a 4-inch separation, and then from here to the end here is about 5 to 6 inches. All right. And again, the end is, and I'm gonna do a video on how to build these. All right. So instead of spending $10 at a surplus store to purchase a pace count beads, I just buy a bunch of paracord, and I can make as many as I need. So each of what would be beads, and just for poops and giggles, we just call them beads. Each of these are cow hitches, which I looped over, cut, and then burnt with a lighter. Now, when you're constructing these, you got to make sure not to, wear gloves, because I don't want you to burn yourself. And plus, you're gonna need a knife. So make sure make sure you're practicing good safety to prevent any injuries. All right. So the breakdown of this is we're going to start off from the top. This is your bite, and again, your bite is where this is where you're going to use to attach to your kit your webbing. So, for instance, this shirt here has a little pin loop, and then you would just thread this through your MOLLE, like so, up and over, and then over and through, and it will stay locked in place, and it won't go anywhere. Now, I definitely suggest I'll go into that later. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So the top portion here is where you're going to have all your kilometers. That means when you get past 900 and you go into 1,000, then you have a kilometer. I normally keep the beads up and then work my way down. Now, whatever system you use, I do this because if I'm in a school and I have all my kit on, I want to be able at night, instead of taking my hand off of a weapon, right, and to move a bead up, instead what I rather do is have all my beads up and then move them down. Because then that way all it takes is one hand to do so. To move them up, I would have to take both hands off my equipment or my rifle, and then I have to slide it up. Instead of doing that a bunch of times, you only have to do it once to reset or recalibrate your beads. Down below, each of these will represent 100 meters. Each one of these every 100 meters, you will slide down one of these hitches, like so. That's 2, 3, 4, and so on. There's 9 on the bottom, and there's 5 on top. Now you can put up to 10 on top, and then 10 on the bottom, but I just put 9, and then this represents the 1,000. All right, so I get to 1,900 meters or 1.9 kilometers, and I go into 2 kilometers. I'm just sliding that down. The longest movement I've done in any school was about 2 kilometers without any stops in between. So you can be prepared for that. You can go as far as 4 kilometers, but I've never gone past 5 in one single movement. And if I do, I'll just break it down in legs, and I'll talk about that later. All right. So now that I talked about that, so this is designed to go around a loop or your webbing. All right. If you're going to a military school, I would not recommend putting your pace count beads on your rucksack, anywhere on your rucksack to annotate the distance you're going, because there are going to be times you're going to be doing practice runs. I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't put it on the shoulder strap of your ruck, but my preference is to put it on the kit, like my LBE or the LBV, whatever they're using these days, your body armor. I'd rather have it on something that I'm going to be wearing all the time versus wearing only during a heavy movement. Using the hitches, having a pace count bead system without using the hitches versus beads. Well, the things with beads, they usually are plastic, and over time, the plastic, because whether or not you're using them or not, the friction that's caused between the movement of these beads or just being there will tend to smooth out the inner portion of the bead, and which when you're just walking, some of these beads will sometimes just fall, and it will make your pace count way off when you go to figure out how far you've gone. All right, so I tend to use the hitches, because if a bead breaks, I can replace it with a hitch. If a hitch falls off, I can just replace it with another hitch. I always have 550 on me, and it's an easy fix. And in less than 2 to 3 minutes, you can fix it and be back on your way. There's other methods you can use other than the beads, and those are, you can, and I don't like using them, but it's all up to your preference. But you can take rocks. You can get, like, count out 10 rocks and then move, have 10 rocks in your left pocket. And every time you move, 100 meters, you just move a rock from your left pocket to your right pocket. But if you're like me, you probably keep a lot of stuff in your pockets anyway. And, so you can, you might just throw something, you might drop a pebble or a rock, or you might forget that you're moving it from left to right or right to left. So you always just pick one method and you stick with it. All right. So that's why I like using the beads, because it's easy. Once I hit 1,000 meters, I just slide them all back up, make sure there's none down, and then, make sure my one bead goes down, and I just start all over. 100, 200, and so on. You can also use, I've seen, when I was as an ROTC instructor, I would see cadets, you put leaves in their pocket and move one leaf to the other. There was a little creek nearby that had clamshells, and I would see cadets go down and pick up clamshells and put 10 in their pocket and move it on the other. There's a lot of slew of different problems with that, but in a tight pinch, it will work. I wouldn't, if you do leaves, I wouldn't do deadfall. I would just pick 10 leaves off a tree. But here's the problem with that. Even still, the leaves break, crunch up in your pocket. You might not get all the, you might miss a few leaves. There's just too many problems. So I just prefer to use the pace count beads because they hold up. And inclement weather, they hold up in the cold. They're big enough so if you're wearing big gloves, you can still have the dexterity to pull one down and work with them. If they get wet, they get tighter. It's pretty awesome. So I rather use these than anything else. All right. Excuse me. So you would use, so when will you use pace count beads? I personally, if I was tracking, like when I had my Fortrex or my, when I had my Fortrex, when I would be out on missions and I know I was patrolling on foot, I would also have my pace count beads in the event that if my Garmin goes down or my GPS goes down, I would use I can pick up where I left off and be fairly accurate with knowing where I'm at or knowing my pace count where I left off. The last thing you want to do is be so reliant upon a GPS system that when it breaks, you don't know where you're at or you don't know how far you've traveled. So I would always use it in conjunction. That's just me. If you're on foot, I would always use a pace count beads, a manual pace count bead system versus using anything automated as a backup. In the future, I'll talk about a pace plan, how to develop a pace plan, what that is, and I'll have several. I might have several of these as part of my pace plan. In an event one breaks, I can just pull another one out and replace it really fast. So yeah, it keeps you moving along by having a pace count system outside of your GPS. Another thing is to do, if you're planning out you're doing your route planning, one of the big things to do is write down each of your legs, okay? Legs of your movement. All right, with azimuth, like I would annotate azimuth, distance, direction, all right, are going to always be key, and where that grid is, and what that, and if that particular point is on a ridge line, if it's on a hilltop, I would write that. So I would, if I'm at my original point, let's say my point is a parking lot, and I'm going up to the top of a hill, and I am dead reckoning, meaning I'm using my map, I'm plotting a grid out on a map. I'm figuring out with my azimuth is what the distance from where I'm currently at to where I want to go. This is dead reckoning. I'm using tools to get from point A to point B. I'm actually using the map, and I'm pointing in that I'm pointing my map in that direction. I'm going in that direction. This is when you will use this. This is where a pace count will be key for your success. But I also write my point is I write the information down. So if I'm at the parking lot, I will write down parking lot. It's 400 meters to my point, going at a 180 degree azimuth, and I'm going to a hilltop. All right. So I look around my area. I look in the direction I'm going. I look to see if I can match the terrain to what's on my map. When that all jives, I go. Now, say for instance, there might be an obstacle that may be in the way. For instance, there might be I might want to avoid built-up areas, a building. I might want to avoid. There might be a draw, something that's really hard to pass through, and I might have to drift. I might have to deviate off course to get around. And there's techniques for that, but this is where pace count really is key to determining that distance. Yeah, because sometimes terrain migrates over tens of years, like over decades. I was in selection, and there was a footpath or a road, an unimproved road that's annotated on a map. But when I got to it, for instance, I was using that as a point to get to. But when I got to a location physically where I had everything matched up, the road wasn't there, or instead that was there, it was a draw was now there, because over time, this was like a 20-year-old map. Over time, the erosion had cut through and created a draw, and I had to cross a little creek bed. So there's that. So you gotta, pace count is really key to figuring out where you're at. So another way to use pace count, so say for instance you're at a national park or you're on a trail, and you stop off at the trailhead and you go to the box where they have the little free maps, and they usually give you those maps usually give you a idea of how long those distance those trails are, and which, so you grab one of those maps and you want to determine how far you're going, then you can use your pace count to do that. So how do you determine, so the big question is, all right, you're doing a lot of talking about pace count, but how do you determine your pace count? All right, so this is how you do it. Now, if you can afford it, what you want to do is buy a tape measure. If you can get a 100 meter tape measure, that's great. That's perfect. All right. Or you can just get a 100-foot tape measure, and that's even perfect. That's even better. Right. But it will be cheaper for you to buy a 100-foot tape measure versus a 100-meter tape measure. You can even go to a college. I would suggest going to a college where they have their tracks, and most colleges' tracks are pretty, they're Olympic size, so you'll be able to measure out easily 100 meters from the 100-meter dash line to where it finishes. But so you have to have 100 meters measured off. So if you don't know how to measure off 100 meters, how do I get that? So first you got to know how many feet are in a meter. So there's 3.28 feet in a meter. which is about 38, or 32 inches, or 38 inches, I forget. I have to re-look that up. I have 32, but I think it's a little bit more than that. So there's that. So there's 328 feet and 100 meters. So depending on what type of tape measure, you can measure off 328 inches. It's going to be tedious, but it can happen. So your natural gait is equal to one natural step. So one natural step is about 30 inches long. To accurately use a pace count method, you must know how many paces it takes to walk 100 meters. To determine this, you must walk accurately measure course and count the number of steps you take. Now, the way I do it, now you can count each step, or you can count every other step, and some people count every third step, but I always do every other step, so alternate steps. So the way this starts off is you start off with I always start off with my right foot. I don't count that step. I count my first left, and I always count my left. So in my pace count is normally 61 to be consistent. 100 meters for me is 60 steps consistently. I round it down to 60. That's for math reasons that I'll go into later. But 60 is a nice round number. It breaks down into quarters very nice, and the numbers for me are really easy to remember. So 60 is my pace count on flat terrain. Now, your pace count will differ depending on the type of terrain you're walking in. So say, for instance, you're walking up a slope, your pace count is going to be different. If you're walking down a slope, it's going to be different. My pace count for 100 meters going up the slope is about 80 steps, every alternate steps. Whereas if I'm walking through thick brush, it's 70. It's 68, but I round it up to 70. I round it up to 70 for a few reasons, because I know I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to err on more steps being taken in thicker brush than I am through flat terrain. If I'm going downhill, again, my pace count is going to be, it's going to be shorter. So going downhill, depending on the slope, it could be more or less. Now I'm thinking about it, because when I was in Kyrgyzstan a few years ago, I remember counting. We did our pace count. I remember going down a 60% grade, and that I took smaller steps going down. I took longer steps going up the steeper the grade. So I don't remember what my pace count was for that, but I remember going downhill because it was really steep. I had to take shorter steps to go down. So I would also, when you're figuring out your pace count, I would also do a pace count in the daytime and in the night. I would do it in the snow, sand, mud. I would do it, as well in the day and the night. Uphill, downhill, day and the night. I even once did it after running a mile. I wanted with a ruck on, because I wanted to simulate being as tired as possible, as tired as I can be, and still functional, and see if my pace count differed. As you're walking from one point to another, a good key thing is not to look at where the endpoint is. Not to look at where the endpoint is, but to look at the horizon, because you want your feet to land naturally. You want your gait to be natural, to be natural as possible, and you don't want to trick your mind into this thinking, I'm going to walk to that point, and boom, you kind of manipulate your thinking into getting the same amount of steps in every time. So I do this 3 times for whatever terrain I'm in, and if I get it consistent, then I either round down depending on how the math works out, or I round up. Again, that all depends on how the math works out, because I want nice even quarters for when I want to measure distances that are not 100 meters, or they go 100 and say 20 meters, or they go 100 and say 40 meters. I want to have a rough estimate of how far that distance is and what to expect of myself. So the way I do that is, so since 60 is my pace count, I divide that into 4 and I get 15. So if I divide 4 into or 100 by 4, then I get 25. So that 15 alternating steps is approximately, and I'm going to use that word strongly, approximately 25 meters. All right. So 25 meters is approximately 30 alternate steps for me. 60 or 30 is 50 meters approximately. 75 meters is 45 alternate steps, and 100 is 60. That's, again, for me on flat terrain. All right. Keep a record of your results. You move, you change terrain, you change locations of where you're working at, training areas. Make sure you keep a documentation of that. I have these little small notebooks, these little Write in the Rain notebooks that I got at ITSEC a couple years back, and that's a simulation world, what do you call it, convention where they give out little trinkets for people in the simulation fields. Okay, so record your distances. Always record. Have a notebook on you. Document where you've gone, so it makes it easy for you to figure out your mistakes. I don't know how many times I've been in a school, I wrote down I plotted the wrong location, or I measured the wrong distance, or I didn't do my declination right, and I ended up foobarring everything. So I was able to fix my mistakes by keeping a good documentation of where I'm at, where I'm going, what that terrain feature is that I'm going to, and I start measuring my legs out of how and what I'm to expect, and I break it down. So if I'm doing like a 500 meter movement, I know I break it down into 100 meter increments. So my first 100 meters, I'm looking for a terrain feature. That terrain feature may be a draw. Once I get to that draw and I pass through that draw, I'm looking for the next terrain feature. That next terrain feature may be a hilltop. So I know after I exit that draw, I should be looking uphill. So I get to the top and I'm at 100 meters, and I'm looking for my next terrain feature, and that might be a road with a 4-way intersection. Now, say for instance, I see the 4-way intersection, I see the road, I'm going in the right distance, I move on, and so forth and so on. So I break my legs down for every movement, so I know what I'm to expect, and I'm cataloging what's coming up. All right. Lastly, before we roll into the footage here, your pace count may change after a leg injury. So say for instance, my pace count was 60, but I broke my leg and I get back, I recover and I get back into everything, and I end up going to a school where I need to do some more land nav. My pace count might change because of that injury. So you always want to keep your pace count up to date. And lastly, Try to avoid using cell phone apps. Don't get addicted to using apps to find your way around in the woods. Don't get addicted to using pedometers to track the distance that you travel, because those count everything. Those don't even, like, you, those can a lot of your pedometers are based off of movement, and not necessarily the step itself. You can move, and you can count paces on your pedometer. And there might be some more out there that are a lot better, but I've seen people use those little pedometers to try to measure out, and those are not the way to go. And don't use a smartwatch while you're in a military school at all, because what will end up happening is you get kicked out. Bottom line, bring what's on the packing list, master what's on the packing list, and that will set you up for success. All right, that is a wrap, everybody. Appreciate you watching. If you have questions, please put them down in the comments, and I will answer them as soon as I see them. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please ask questions. Remember to subscribe, hit like, share, hit the little notification bell, so whenever I post new content, you get it as soon as possible. I'm hoping that y'all have a safe and wonderful weekend. And this is Javier. I'm out. The Oppresso Liber.